What's up, everybody? James Duggan here with IGN. Joining me is Steve Mesner from PC Gamer. We're breaking all the rules.
That's right. Hello.
Yes, to talk about World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth, and more specifically, Islands. Before we dive into it, for the uninitiated and those who haven't really been keeping up with the expansion, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of what Islands are. So they're essentially this either PvE or PvPvE randomized procedural game mode. It's a little bit obtuse to explain, but it's 3v3. You're basically landing on this island that can be populated with these randomly generated biomes of enemies, portals, treasure, stuff like that. And then on the other side of the island, either a group of 3 advanced NPCs, and we'll talk about that later, mimicking players are landing from the opposite faction, or if you choose the PvP mode, it's just 3 enemy players on the other side. So Steve,
hello.
You got to play this, I got to play this. What were your initial impressions?
I am very excited for this game mode. So, I'm a big Warcraft fan. I've been playing it for, since I was a kid, basically. And, the sort of small group content for all of that time has been dungeons. And dungeons are great, but they're also so static. So you're just doing the same thing over and over again. The bosses die the same way. There's the same enemies. And Island Expeditions feel really fresh and exciting because it's basically like the antithesis of that. Everything is chaotic and new. Every single time you go to the island, there's different enemies that have spawned. There's different objectives to work towards. I really like that. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was just sort of crazy and chaotic, and I love the element of like the PvP tension that always exists. Even if you're not necessarily always fighting the other team, the fact that they're there and you're competing, I think is really compelling as well.
We played on the normal mode.
Yeah.
There is normal, heroic, mythic, and then PvP. And on the normal mode, I don't know what I was expecting. I got onto the island, and we obviously only played it once, so that's kind of analogous to like playing Binding of Isaac once,
right.
And then rendering a verdict on it. So it's a little bit tough. But that being said, a lot of the stuff was a little bit tank and spank.
Yes.
I think as we get into heroic and mythic, the telegraphs on the ground, the mechanics from the bosses will become more ingrained, and you'll really have to observe those, and I think that'll lend some really nice variance. It felt a little bit noisy for me at the start, though. But anyway, I guess two things that are unique about this mode that jumped out to me that I'd love to talk about.
Sure.
Number one, when you hit M, there's kind of a fog of war.
Right.
You can see the island, but you cannot see all the nodes of Azerite, which is the goal. That's the reason you're there, is to fill up this bar of Azerite before the enemy team does, which kind of powers up your amulet and is something that you need and that your faction needs to help win this war, XYZ. So there's an exploration element to it, and that's a part of World of Warcraft that I think is just a primary motif, although something that isn't really prevalent anymore. I think when I think about like vanilla World of Warcraft, I think about exploring, but it's cool to see that as a more de facto mechanic. And then the second big takeaway for me was the advanced NPC AI.
Right.
And I think actually one of the core foundations of World of Warcraft is the predictability of the enemies. The aggro range, what they're going to do, and obviously their deviations from the initial I'm going to go and punch you in the face thought process that the enemy AI has always had, like spells and boss mechanics and things like that. But this was an attempt to completely subvert that. And an attempt to make AI that behaves a little bit like players. And I have to say straight away, it felt very good. It felt like, having played World of Warcraft for 12 years or however long it's been, fighting these NPCs, it was almost a little bit like Magister's Terrace.
Right.
There's that mock arena 5v5 fight.
Yes.
It was a little bit like that, but kind of dialed up to 11.
It's very convincing. Yeah, no, I felt like it was so convincing. I mean, they were dumb, but we also have to admit that like the first fight we got into, they totally like whooped us. Like
they did. Yeah.
We got destroyed by them, and I think that was because we were underestimating them. I don't think they're on par with a proper team of experienced WoW players, but they were convincing enough that I was having a lot of fun, and I was kind of forgetting that they were AI. One of the things I loved is they even jumped convincingly, which is functionally useless. Jumping serves no purpose, but just about everybody who PvPs in WoW jumps a lot because it's just sort of, I think it gives you something to do in the interim between your attacks, and it makes you feel like you're doing something.
Yeah.
And they were jumping around a lot and casting spells and healing one another and all sorts of crazy things. So I really like it. I think it'll be interesting to see. What excites me about this system is I feel like it is a seed that Blizzard has invested in technologically, and I'm really excited because I'm like, what is this going to look like in 10 years?
Sure. Yeah, or even in 6 months. I think one thing that immediately jumped out to me And before we get into actually this topic, let's just talk about an overarching theme of Battle for Azeroth. I was sitting with Tom Marks, formerly a PC gamer, now working at IGN yesterday, and I asked him...
The betrayer.
I know. Tom Marks, the betrayer. Like, he's Illidan 2.0. I asked him, he hasn't played for a number of years, and I asked him, like, when you see Battle for Azeroth, when you see the promotional material, what do you think the primary motif is? What do you think the primary gameplay mechanic behind Battle for Azeroth is? And he's like, oh, very obviously, it's PvP. It's the Horde versus the Alliance. It's players fighting each other. And I was like, that's so funny, because yes, I agree. I think that when I look at Battle for Azeroth, I'm thinking like, oh wow, yeah, world PvP, emergent PvP, raiding capital cities. That's, you know, that's the whole interest cinematic, is the raid on the Undercity. But the way that that's represented so far that we've seen is through PvE, through like this mock PvP.
Yes.
And that totally rubs me the wrong way. But with that said, I think there are ways they could implement some of these cool mock players. Interestingly, an example would be there's this new war mode where now there are no PvE or PvP servers anymore. You have to go to your capital city, toggle on PvP, and that kind of shards you with a bunch of other people looking to PvP in the open world, which is cool. Maybe we'll see. I have to imagine like 3 to 5% of the actual server population is going to be doing this on the initial level up, or the total population of WoW.
Right.
I cannot imagine a bunch of people are going to do this, even for the extra experience or gold or whatever. But in that mode, one of the things that Ian Hazzikostas said was, we can design stuff that normally we wouldn't be able to because of this disparity between PvE and PvP servers. An example he used was like a PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds airdrop.
Right.
And it drops on the map and everybody can see it, and then you have to go squabble over it, and maybe you get something like gold or transmog gear or mount or whatever. That's really cool. When we fought these mock player advanced NPC AI dudes, one thing I thought was like, man, they could give this AI to Gen Greymane, and he could go roam around Darkshire or something, or they could give it to a cart with Anduin on it, and there's a bunch of like it could be a very cool PvPvE open world emergent encounter that could yield something. I think that's kind of like what I want to see.
You just blew my mind.
That's exactly what I want to see out of Battle for Azeroth.
Right, something like that. I mean, you're right though. Like, it is a very, you know, they're ramping up this big conflict between Horde and Alliance. They're getting back to sort of their roots, but they're doing it in a very couched way, because it's all through like abstract PvE methods. And I don't know. I think that's. I think they're kind of trapped in that sense, because World of Warcraft is fundamentally a PvE game. Like, you're never going to have sort of the dramatic battles that you would see in like Warcraft 3 even, or just throughout lore.
Sure.
Or you're never going to participate in them.
And that bums me out though, for sure. Because I do, over the course of the years, I do remember some really, really fun emergent open world PvP encounters. One of them being in Arathi Highlands. I think it was like level 40 something, and then there were level 60s, and a bunch of people were fighting, and we were all fighting around Hammerfall. And I'd like to see more incentive around that. I'd like to see more incentive to go explore the world. Obviously, the new zones are going to be great, but the thing that Islands reminded me of after I actually played them, I think on paper they were really cool. They were like a greater Rift. They were like Dungeon 2.0, but it's randomized and infinitely replayable. But after playing it, the thing that it reminded me of, and I hate that I have to make this, that I'm about to make this comparison, but the thing that it reminded me of most was Ashran. It felt like a tiny little Ashran. It felt like, okay, we're running around, we're doing these PvE encounters that are not particularly challenging. It's all role agnostic.
Yes.
Like, we were playing as 2 tanks and a DPS, strangely enough. But again, this was on normal mode. One of the questions I asked the developers was about that, about scenarios, and how scenarios never really hit because they weren't really challenging, because they were role agnostic. And one thing that dungeons and raids do obviously very well for me and everybody else is they really push you to your limits mechanically, and that's the core experience, I guess, of World of Warcraft now. And I wanted to see that echoed in Islands. In normal, I did not feel that was there. I think maybe in Mythic it could be. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, there was an element that, like, what we were doing, the things we were fighting for on the island were not exciting at all. What excited me about the island was sort of that, like I mentioned, like that looming threat of PvP. And there were moments where, even though the AI, I think, was, you know, we were playing on normal, so they were too dumb to sort of capitalize on bad calls we were making. But like at one point we went into that fiery portal and we were taking on the boss, right?
I got whooped.
Yeah, I was already dead, so I was running back when you got whooped. But when we all eventually made it there for the big finale, there was a moment where we were fighting that boss, and I was very aware of how vulnerable we were as a party. And I was thinking, like, at any moment, these guys could, like, the other team could come storming through this portal.
Yeah.
They could kill us, they could wipe us all out, and then finish off the boss and, like, have this big finish. And basically like clutch victory. And I think if those moments can happen in the PvP mode or even on the mythic mode against the AI, I think Islands will be a success. But I do agree with you in that I think Blizzard has historically struggled for a long time to make PvP rewarding and interesting for people beyond just their own want and desire to harm other players.
Yeah.
Because I think that's why World PvP existed for so long and was so thriving in vanilla Warcraft, was because people just enjoyed messing up someone else's day.
That's certainly the heart of it.
Yeah.
Let me ask you. So that reminded me, like,
Sure.
The enemy AI team wiped us once or twice. We wiped them quite a few times. What was the reward for that? Did you notice Azeroth?
Yeah.
Did you, like, I was a little bit fuzzy on the objectives.
So I think that there's definitely like a problem with like information, like distilling information to you when you're playing that game mode. The UI doesn't really, it needs like some new elements on it to help you understand what's going on. But the way it works is that everyone, the longer you live, the more Azeroth you are worth as a kill. So when we killed them, we would gain Azeroth for our team. If they had been alive for a long time, they would be worth more Azeroth. And in fact, that's actually true for all of the bosses on the island. There's almost like this element of maybe it's not like, maybe our strategy of going and taking down those Hydras that we went after right away wasn't the right thing to do. Maybe we should have went and gone for weaker trash packs and let those Hydras basically like farm up their Azeroth worth and then revisited them.
Because they were on, like, right next to our spawn.
Yeah, and so they weren't worth as much Azeroth as they would be later. And the same is true for players. So maybe there's an incentive to not go for players right away, unless you can totally stomp them, you know, several times in a row. But
sure,
there's
and deny them their farm.
Right.
That's definitely interesting.
Yeah, like there's a decreased incentive to attack players again and again and again because they're gonna be worth a paltry amount of Azeroth versus finding the right moment to just get one big gank in on them.
Sure. So closing thoughts for me for Islands are,
sure.
I think that there is a lot more I still have to see, and it could be something that I really dig into and enjoy once the game comes out, and all of those boss fights and all of that stuff that just kind of felt like pulling trash, an infinite amount of trash when we played, could actually have a lot of meaning and a lot of weight to it gameplay-wise.
I think like I'm the same. I'm cautiously optimistic. I dare say I'm just straight optimistic. I really like the mode. I think, you know, in talking with the developers, they were really big on, like, they wanted this to be all about choice. And, like, you just go out and you have a bunch of choices. Do we go and attack these mobs? Do we go straight for the players? Do we go do this, this, or this? And I think in that area it succeeds. It was really interesting to me how much sort of strategy was always present around me. And I think at first it was hard to sort of understand exactly what those, you know, strategic choices were. But I think it's a system that has a lot of depth to it, which is great. And I think the variability of it is going to make it really fresh and exciting, as long as Blizzard can kind of keep pace and add new things and maybe, yeah, add new islands down the road. But from what I've seen so far, I'm all hands on board. I like it a lot.
Fantastic. Where can folks find you and all the stuff you've written about Battle for Azeroth?
Definitely. So, I'm at PC Gamer, so head over to PCGamer.com, and we have a constant Battle for Azeroth coverage. You can also follow me personally at Twitter at Steven Messner. Steven with a V, Messner is the last name.
Fantastic. You can follow me at Thug and Duggan. Go ahead and check out Steven's stuff on PC Gamer. Thank you so much, Steven.